I'm outside Tiger Stadium on the campus of LSU in Baton Rouge. This is the 7th largest stadium in the world. Capacity 102,321. You know, I started coming to games here when I was 3. Don't really remember that at all, but I do remember a few glimpses of when my brother Doug played here. He was a big star, won many games for them. Also named to the 1965 All-American team, one of many honors he has achieved, and there have been many. So my brother Doug Moreau, I was 7 when you were a senior at LSU, and I vaguely remember really one play in your career, and that was 1965 against Tulane, and you were ahead 60-0. There was a 2-point conversion that was involved. Tell us about that real quick.
Well, LSU had beaten Tulane 62-0
Right.
in prior years within the last 7 or 8 years.
58 and 61.
Before that, yeah. And so we decided when we got near the end of this game, this would be a pretty good goal, to have. So, but we had Billy Ezel was my holder for place kicks, and he wanted to try an extra point. So we let him try one, and he missed it.
Oh, really? Okay.
So we ended up having to go for 2 in order to match the 62-0
Exactly.
scores of previous.
And you caught the pass.
So we did. So Pat Screen was our quarterback, and he called a pattern to me out in the corner of the end zone for the 2-point conversion, and we succeeded on it. We won 62-0, which didn't make the Tulane people very happy, but it made us very happy.
And it's if it was in the LSU student section side of the field, then it would have been right in front of the U High section.
That's exactly where it was.
Okay, and maybe that's why I remember. But I do remember, and I think I remember the laughter, kind of, because at the time Tulane was having a rough time at that time.
Well, we had some laughter too because I think Pat prevailed upon Coach Mack to actually go for 2,
right.
which was not a real class thing to do.
No, but
when you're up 60-0, you want to make it 62. That's all right.
Yeah, you mentioned Pat. Pat was kind of like a bigger brother to me because y'all were roommates in college, and by the time you went to the Dolphins, he would come over, spend the night. We'd drive to the airport in New Orleans the next morning. I always went with him.
Yeah,
so it was always fun. Something I also just remembered is that I wrote letters to you at training camp all the time, and the fact that you even could respond as you were fighting for a position on an NFL team, I have to thank you. I can't even believe that when I think back about it. But when you're young, I think you think the world revolves around you, and even some older people think that too, right? But thank you for those letters. There were many, and I wish I had them. But
I wish I had.
it was.
I wish I recalled them as well as you.
Well, you did, and you have a great penmanship. Another thing about Pat Screen is that after you played for the Dolphins, you came back to LSU, went to law school, got your law degree, went on to become a judge and then district attorney. But before that really took place, you were in 1972. First year on the LSU Football Network. So this is 51 years. But John Ferguson, who did the play-by-play, along with Walter Hill, who did the commercials. Pat Screen was a sideline reporter, but you both figured into the next move for you. Tell us about that.
John said that Pat was actually the first sideline broadcaster, and he probably was. It was a creation of John Ferguson. And so he put Pat on the sideline with a microphone, and he would comment as time went on during the game on various things that happened.
As an expert
during
player
the game.
that could describe things.
Exactly.
Which is what you
And this was kind of unheard of back in those days.
Yeah, it was.
Now they got people all over the sideline. But back then it didn't work that way. And so Pat decided after a couple of years, he had always had an interest in going down to New Orleans, working for the New Orleans Jazz basketball team. And he had a close relationship with some business people involved in the ownership of it. And so he made the decision that he was going to go to work for the Jazz. When he did that, it opened up the sideline reporter opportunity. It wasn't really an opportunity, but I was asked, if I'd take over Pat's place because he was going to New Orleans to work with the Jazz.
And
that's how I kind of got started. I started with the freshman games for a couple of years, and then when Pat went to New Orleans with the Jazz, I took over the sideline broadcasting. Then Walter Hill, after 2 or 3 years, he retired from being a broadcaster at all.
Right.
He just retired. And so John asked me if I would move from the sideline up to the booth and become the color commentator. I don't think they were even called that back then.
Right.
But that's what.
Would it be analyst now? Analyst or something?
That's what they call them now. I don't know what it means.
Well, there's a play that call that John Ferguson made, and he had the best voice in the
Great
world.
voice.
In the world,
Great.
ever, really. Did TVS, that was a network, basketball games, did bowl games. He didn't do just LSU. He did a lot more than that. But there's a call in the game against Ole Miss, 1972, at the very last play. We'll listen to
1 second to play, and so time will run out on the next one. Here's the game over. Jones back to throw, looking for a receiver. He has Davis. It is good for football. On the last play of the game, Brad Davis gets a very good pass to the corner of the end zone. And the game rides on this kick now. Here is the point coming up. Jackson boots it. The Tigers win, 17-16.
working with John Ferguson, who I remember really well, but most people remember you and Jim Hawthorne. What was the difference in those dynamics?
Well, John was older than Jim, obviously, and Jim had come from North Louisiana, came down and took over when John retired. And I was asked if I would do the color on the radio broadcast, which I was not a broadcaster, still not a broadcaster, but I wasn't at all. And so it was
He's a broadcaster.
An opportunity for people that were real broadcasters. I mean, people that they had microphones, they had all their equipment, and they would let me borrow it for one Saturday night every week during the football season. And so it was great because I had all these people that were really good broadcasters to teach me about how not to make mistakes.
You learn from great ones.
So it was just a great opportunity, and I got to the point where I enjoyed it and still do.
Well, people enjoyed it. You were there for some of the great calls. 51 years, you were there for some of the great calls. And that includes, with Jim Hawthorne, the Bluegrass Miracle.
Randall stops, throws it as far as he can. Caught! Touchdown! I do not believe it! The Tigers pulled off another miracle. It was Devery Henderson who caught it on the last play of the game. Holy cow!
Jim,
I've never seen it happen before in my life.
Unbelievable play I think I have ever seen in all the years. Their fans on the other end
They can't believe
the goalpost down. I don't think they realize LSU won it.
Is there, in all this time, any game or season that could stand out differently than others?
Well, there always is, but you never know that until it's in retrospect. It's hard to anticipate. And I'll give you the most recent example because people are very familiar with it. The LSU win over Alabama last year, the 2-point conversion, and all of the weeping and
Caught
gnashing.
people by surprise, really.
Yeah,
right?
the weeping and gnashing of teeth as people said, well, they're going to kick the extra point and then it'll go into overtime.
Again.
And LSU decided that they're going to go ahead and go for 2, and let's go ahead and try to win the game right now. That was really improbable.
Yeah.
But it happened, and it happened successfully.
Boy, it's gutsy, too.
Real gutsy. But it's one of the great wins in LSU history because of that. because it was a great call by the coach. It really took a lot of fortitude for him to make that decision, but it led to such a great victory against a great team, and one that LSU was not expected to beat. So
Right.
it was the play of the century.
And team that's been the best, I would think that's obvious. The best team, because you're now in the broadcast with Chris Blair, who took over after Jim Hawthorne retired. But 2019, I would think, would be, everybody thinks that's the best team maybe in college football history.
I think you could label it that way, and nobody could really argue with that. And a lot of it is based upon Joe Burrow, and Joe Burrow, who spelled his name in different ways on the back of his jersey, and he ingratiated himself with LSU fans forever in doing that. And he's one of the favorites, and will always be for LSU fans because of the success he had. And during the season, as it went along, he had more and more success, and LSU became a great team. They didn't start out the season necessarily as a great team. They were very good, but they weren't great. They became great as the season went along, and then, of course, won the national championship, and that makes it even greater.
Now we come up to another season. Again, your 51st broadcasting on the LSU Football Network, and LSU Florida State opens things up, number 5 versus number 8. It's a much anticipated game, especially following last year's game, which was not that great until the very end, and then a blocked extra point kept us from going into overtime. Maybe in a game that we shouldn't have been in anyway. But your thoughts on this game?
Well, because of the fact that it takes place against Florida State, and last year it was Florida State's second game of the season. It was LSU's first game of the season. But nobody really knew what kind of LSU team there would be because we got a new coach. We have a bunch of players that nobody's ever heard of, some of whom about mid-season you start to hear their name more frequently, and it becomes kind of a common name, but it wasn't at the beginning of the season. And so for LSU to have lost the game the way they lost it in a game that they should have won, and kind of gave it away. Very disappointing to the team.
They played really poorly.
Played poorly.
Muffed punts and
No, played poorly, made a bunch of mistakes that could have changed the game around at any phase of the game. But as the season went on, LSU became better and better, and they won some games you wouldn't expect them to win. They became after the bowl game, they became a great bowl team.
But they did.
Because it was
63
when you play Purdue, it's easier.
Yeah.
but that's okay because LSU deserved to have a great win in the bowl.
Right.
As people look back on the season, they'll remember that as a great win for LSU, although the season didn't go it wasn't pretty all along, but it was pretty enough.
But it's propelled them into this year as a highly ranked team. They have their quarterback returning. They have a lot of players returning, and some key players that aren't going to be playing. But still, how do you see this game shaping up?
Well, of course, I'm always going to pick I don't want to say it's the home team.
Purple and gold.
Because it's in Orlando,
Right.
But it's the purple and gold.
Same stadium you were at
it's
last year, actually, for the Citrus Bowl.
LSU has people that at the beginning of last year, I do the lineups before the game starts, and there are all kind of names on the team last year that nobody had ever heard of. They were freshmen. They were people who had come to LSU as transfers. There were people not expected to be any stars by any means. They became stars. And by the time they got to the end of the season, everybody knew who they were. Starting out this season, everybody already knows who they are.
Right.
Knows who many of the great players are. Mason Smith unfortunately, he gets injured again. He got injured the first series against Florida State last year. He got ruled ineligible for the first game of this season. So matching up against Florida State in 2 open of the season games for LSU like that makes it one that you really look at and you think this game has an opportunity of really being special, setting the table for LSU. And I think that's what I look forward to see if LSU can carry over the way they ended up last year, beginning this new season that way. And I think that can really sort them out going in the right direction. Now, it's up to them. They've got to do it because Florida State's a good team. They have a chance of beating LSU if LSU lets them win, but I think LSU should be the favorite. They're all with me anyway.
Yeah, okay. And the season is expected to be a very, very good one by many. I noticed in the past few days, more of the prognosticators are switching over to Florida State, it seems, than LSU, even though LSU is like a 2.5 point favorite. It's very close. And we'll just wait and see. By the way, we are sitting in front of the Miller Digby Trophy right here, which is the MVP of the Sugar Bowl. You won that after beating Syracuse. You played a big role in that. Some of your awards up here, I used to look around and you played racquetball, you played all of these things for fun after you retired and when you were a judge and when you were a DA. I always marveled at all the trophies you had. So this is a mere fraction of the trophies you've won in your lifetime.
The others have ended up in the trash bin of history at the instructions of my wife.
Well, yeah, right, yeah, Elaine. Well, it's so much fun to talk to you again as my brother, but I'm amazed that I'm looking at this, and so in 1972, I was 14 when you started the broadcasting career at LSU. I was 14, and so even the idea of that is shows the longevity, and you've done all sorts of things, but you're retired, but this is what you're doing now for fun.
I've been the recipient of a lot of good fortune in my life, and I'm very appreciative of it. Most of it is as a result of the man up there. It's not the result of me. So I'll forever thankful at all of the good things that have come my way.
He's definitely smiled on our wonderful family.
He has.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Andre. Enjoyed being with you, as always.